Today's video is about a mysterious ghost ship, which was found floating inside the Permuda Triangle. The discovery of this ship left the whole world shocked. So how did this ship end up here? What was it doing inside the Bermuda Triangle? Let's find out. The year is 1980. A Coast Guard vessel was sent to investigate reports of an abandoned sailboat in the Bermuda Triangle. As the ship sailed further into the sea, they had no idea that they were in for a huge shock of their lives. The officers and crew members had actually expected to find an ordinary run-of-the-mill sailboat. But what they found instead was far from what they had expected. As the ship got closer, it became more clear that there was definitely something wrong with the sailboat. It was not moving under its own power like normal sailboats. It was literally being pushed by the waves of the ocean. On top of that, the conditions were unusually calm, so much so that it was unbelievable. It was almost as if the ocean was not even bothered by the sailboat at all. As the Coast Guard ship drew nearer to the abandoned boat, one of the officers noticed something strange. There was a lifeboat inside the sailboat, but it wasn't in the water. Instead, it was hanging from the mast like a scarecrow. It's only added to the mystery. Why would someone leave the lifeboat like this and just abandon the ship? To make matters even stranger, the officer noticed a bottle of rum on the side of the boat next to the life buoy. But what really made the officer raise his eyebrows was that the bottle was sealed shut. This meant that whoever was on the ship recently had tried to get rid of the rum, but then changed their mind at the last moment. There was also a flare gun lying around on the ship, which only added more questions than answers. They pulled the ship out of the water and put in a team to look around. But as soon as they stepped foot on the ship, things started getting weird. There was nothing that suggested that the ship had been abandoned for any length of time. Everything was exactly where it should have been, and there was no sign of a struggle. One of the men turned on the radio to see if he could get a signal and contact the authorities. But as soon as he did that, a strange sound started coming through the radio. At first, it sounded like static, but then they realized that it was an SOS signal. The man tried to respond, but whatever was making the noise cut him off every time he tried to talk. They tried to figure out where the transmission was coming from, but there was no way to tell. The transmission seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was like the radio was glitching out. They started to feel uneasy. One of them decided to go check the bedrooms to see if there were any clues as to who had been on the ship and what had happened to them. But he came back pale and shaken after seeing something inside one of the rooms. He told the others that he had seen something in one of the rooms that he could unexplain. He said that it looked like a person, but it wasn't solid, and when he tried to touch it, he went right through it. Some of the men didn't believe him, but the look on his face told them that he was telling the truth. They knew that they were dealing with something supernatural, but they still tried to hold on to their skepticism. One of the men decided to look in the ship's log to see if he could find any answers. It was a man named Benjamin. Benjamin had been writing about how excited he was to set sail and explore the Bermuda Triangle. He had written about how the ocean was calm and the sky was clear, not a single cloud in sight. Then suddenly, the tone of the entries changed. The handwriting was now sloppy and frantic. Benjamin was writing about how the weather had taken a turn for the worse. He wrote about how he was worried that the ship might capsize, but he was trying to stay calm and keep writing. Then the entries stopped abruptly. The men looked at each other, realizing that they were in the middle of the ocean on a ghost ship. They tried to make sense of what was happening, but there were no answers. The wood was creaking and groaning, and the men could feel the ship moving beneath their feet. They knew that they needed to get off the ship, but they couldn't bring themselves to move. The men tried to convince themselves that it was just an old ship making noises. But they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They decided to leave the ship and go back to the Coast Guard vessel. As they made their way to the shore, they could feel the eyes of the ghost ship burning into their backs. They never looked back. When the news of the ghost ship spread, people were shocked. Some said that it was a hoax, while others believed that it was real. The men who had found the ship were interviewed, but they couldn't provide any more details. They had seen enough. Years passed, but the mystery of the ghost ship remained unsolved. Some say that the ship is still out there, waiting to be found, while others say that it was just a figment of the men's imaginations. Some people were skeptical about the story and thought that it was just another hoax. After all, the Bermuda Triangle had a reputation for being a place where strange things happened, and people sometimes made up stories to attract attention. However, many people believed the story and were fascinated by the mystery of the ghost ship. They could understand how a ship could just appear out of nowhere and why it had been abandoned. As the years went by, the story of the ghost ship became more and more popular. Some people even claimed to have seen the ghost ship for themselves, but it was always just out of sight. They wanted to see the ghost ship for themselves and maybe find out what happened to it. But the ship was never found and the mystery remained unsolved. One day, a group of tourists decided to go on a boat tour of the Bermuda Triangle. They were hoping to see some dolphins and maybe even some whales. But what they saw was something they would never forget. The boat was sailing along when suddenly they saw a shape in the distance. Couldn't make out what it was, but it looked like a ship. It looked exactly like the ghost ship that had been described in the legend. The tourists were shocked and scared. They had heard the legend of the ghost ship before, and they didn't want to get too close to it. But the captain of the boat was determined to find out what was going on. He steered the boat closer to the ghost ship and called out to see if anyone was on board. But there was no reply. The only sound they could hear was the sound of the waves crashing against the hull of the ship. The captain decided to go aboard the ghost ship to see if he could find anyone. But as soon as he stepped foot on the ship, he felt a cold breeze, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. He could feel the eyes of the ghost ship burning into him. He went into the cabins and looked under the beds, but there was no sign of life. He went up to the deck and looked around, but the only thing he saw was the endless ocean. The captain was scared and confused. He didn't know what to do. He decided to leave the ship and go back to the boat. The voice was weak and shaky, but the captain could hear the desperation in it. He kept calling out for help, but the captain couldn't understand what was happening. They were all scared, and they wanted to get away from the ghost ship. The captain agreed, and he started the engine, turned the boat around, and headed away from the ghost ship. It was floating in the water, and it was heading right towards them. The tourists screamed and hid under the seats. They were terrified that the ghost ship was coming after them. But the captain stayed calm. He knew that he had to do something to defend himself. He grabbed a life buoy and threw it at the ghost ship, hit the ship, and it stopped moving. The captain let out a sigh of relief. He had defended himself and the tourists, but he knew that the ghost ship was still out there. He kept an eye on it, but it never moved again. From that day on, the tourists never forgot their encounter with the ghost ship. They told the story to their friends and family, and it became a local legend. The Bermuda Triangle is a mysterious place, and the ghost ship is just one of the many mysteries that have been discovered there. Who knows what other secrets the ocean holds? Who knows what other secrets the ocean holds?